So imagine standing on this massive, heavy wooden dock.
Right, and it's not a modern dock.
Exactly. The air around you is just thick, It's humid, heavy with the smell of raw sea salt.
And spices.
Yeah, something sharp like maybe bulk black pepper or that sweet medicinal scent of cinnamon. You're watching this towering wooden boat slowly heave against the tide.
A boat completely devoid of a single iron nail, which is crazy to think of.
It really is. And the dock workers are shouting to each other, but they aren't speaking just one language. You hear Arabic, you catch phrases in Tamil, some Gujarati, a bit of Swahili, and maybe like a coastal Chinese dialect.
Just a complete melting pot.
Completely. And then a live elephant is being carefully offloaded from the hold of this ship.
An actual elephant.
Right next to crates, packed tightly with delicate porcelain and bundles of indigo. And the thing is, you aren't in modern New York or London.
No, not at all.
You are standing in the middle of the Indian Ocean in a coastal port city. And the year is 1350.
It's a scene that completely shatters our modern bias, I think.
Oh, for sure. How so?
Well, we have this deeply ingrained assumption that true globalization, where languages, massive commercial supply chains, and complex ideas cross thousands of miles seamlessly, we assume it requires a silicon chip.
Right, or at least like a steam engine.
Exactly. We think it requires fiber optic cables or satellite networks, but what we're looking at today completely dismantles that.
It really does. So today, for you listening, we are taking a deep dive into this maritime superhighway. It connected the eastern coast of Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, the Indian subcontinent, and the outer edges of China.
And we're talking about a period roughly from the 7th to the 16th century.
Yeah, and they pulled off a level of global integration that honestly rivals our modern supply chains.
Yeah.
And they did it using nothing but wood, woven coconut fibers, and the breath of the wind.
The sheer scale of the intercultural cooperation is what makes this period so vital to understand. We aren't just looking at, a dry sequence of rulers or dates.
Nobody wants that.
Right. We are examining how the sheer necessity of moving highly valuable commodities across vast expanses of water completely re-engineered human societies.
And a major part of that was religion.
Right, yeah. The major unifying thread across this ocean was the spread of Islam. But, and this is key, not through conquest or armies marching over borders.
So no big military invasions.
Yeah, exactly. We are looking at a localized, organic adoption of a global framework driven primarily by commerce, pragmatism, and human geography.
So we're going to figure out how this massive oceanic machine actually worked. The engineering of the ships, the terrifying skill of the navigators, and those hyper-libertarian port cities that acted as the hinges of the world.
The port cities are truly fascinating.
We'll definitely get into those. Then we'll zoom in on 3 very distinct coastal communities to see how local people negotiated their ancient identities with this massive wave of international culture.
But to understand how we end up with multilingual dock workers unloading elephants, we have to go back to the beginning.
Right. The environment is the main character here, specifically the Arabian Sea. And looking at the timeline, humans were trying to conquer this water thousands of years before our main story even begins.
Yeah, the technological evolution of maritime transit is the foundation of everything. We can trace this back about 5,000 years to the marsh areas of the Tigris and Euphrates Delta.
So modern-day Iraq, basically.
Yes. Early inhabitants there were navigating the waterways using simple bundled reed canoes.
Just reeds tied together.
Right. And they were highly effective for shallow, calm marshland, but completely useless in the open ocean swell.
Because they just sit on top of the water, right? Like they'd get swamped instantly. There's no real hull.
Exactly. And they lack the structural integrity to carry any significant weight. The true leap forward, which coincides roughly with the rise of the Indus Valley civilization, is the advent of the Carvel-built wooden boat.
Okay. Wooden boat.
It's an incredible conceptual leap for early engineering. A wooden hull derives its buoyancy from enclosed air. Once you figure out how to trap a massive pocket of air inside a watertight wooden shell, you fundamentally change the mathematics of what you can carry.
And how far you can transport it. You basically transition from a small river skiff to a floating warehouse.
Precisely. And that transition allows for the very first routine maritime connections between the early civilizations of Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and Egypt.
But they aren't, like, sailing out into the deep ocean yet, are they?
No, we shouldn't picture them sailing into the deep blue unknown just yet. These early wooden craft were strictly engaged in cabotage.
Cabotage, that means coastal hugging, right?
Exactly. They sailed close to the shore, navigating by landmarks, dropping anchor at night. They moved luxury items like pearls and gold, but more importantly, heavy bulk goods.
Like timber, dates, grain.
Right, stuff that's low value but high volume.
It's basically the ancient equivalent of a local delivery truck, just making 50 stops along a coastal highway.
That's a great way to look at it.
But eventually, they step on the gas. They stop hugging the coast and start shooting straight across the open, terrifying void of the Arabian Sea.
And the only way they do that is by harnessing the single most important meteorological phenomenon in human history.
The monsoons?
The monsoons. They are the engine of this entire oceanic world. The word itself comes from the Arabic word masim, which simply means season.
Okay, so it's a seasonal thing. How does the physics of it actually work?
Well, the physics are driven by the massive Asian landmass to the north. In the summer, the land heats up intensely.
Right, because it's huge.
Yeah, and hot air rises, creating a massive low-pressure zone. That essentially sucks in the moist, heavy air from over the Indian Ocean.
So it creates this massive wind tunnel.
Exactly, a relentless wind blowing from the southwest from roughly June to October.
And then the Earth tilts, the seasons change, and the whole system throws it in reverse.
Right. The Asian landmass cools down rapidly in the winter, creating a high-pressure zone. Now, the cold, dry air rushes back out toward the warmer ocean.
Creating a steady wind blowing from the northeast from November through March.
You've got it.
So we have this incredibly aggressive, predictable reversal. North of the equator, the wind goes one way for half the year and the opposite way for the other half.
It's remarkably consistent.
I've been trying to wrap my head around the social implications of this for you guys listening, and I came up with an analogy. It's like a natural oceanic subway system.
A subway system, I like that.
Yeah. You get on the Southwest line in the summer, ride it to your destination, do your business, and then you just catch the Northeast line back home in the winter.
The subway analogy captures the predictability, definitely. But there is a crucial difference that changes the entire sociological outcome.
Oh, what's that?
If you take a subway downtown, you can usually turn around and take another train back an hour later. The monsoon doesn't let you do that.
Oh, right, because the wind is still blowing the same way.
Exactly. Once you ride the southwest wind from, say, the coast of Yemen over to the Malabar coast of India, you are trapped there.
You literally cannot sail back against it.
You cannot. You have to wait months for the northeast monsoon to kick in.
Oh, wow. I hadn't really thought about the waiting period. You're just physically marooned in a foreign port for half the year.
And that forced waiting period is the crucible of globalization. Because you are stuck in a place like Calicut or Cambay for 5 months, you don't just sleep on your boat.
Right, you'd go crazy.
You rent a warehouse, you hire local guards, you form business partnerships, you might even marry a local woman and start a second family.
Wow. So the meteorological reality of the monsoon forced these transient sailors to become settled diaspora communities.
It didn't just move goods, it forced cultures to intertwine.
That makes total sense. The wind forces a residency requirement on the merchants.
And they figured this out pretty early. By roughly 1000 BCE, sailors had mapped this out.
So by 400 BCE, you have Indian and Arab sailors saying, forget the coastal delivery route, let's just point the bow at India, ride the summer wind, and we'll see you in a few weeks.
Exactly. But pointing the bow into the open ocean requires a terrifying level of skill. The texts refer to this as wayfinding.
Wayfinding. It sounds almost magical.
It's perhaps the purest intersection of human observation and natural science. Long before the magnetic compass was widely adopted in the Arabian Sea.
Which came from China, right?
Yes, a later introduction from Chinese mariners. But before that, Indian Ocean navigators relied on an immense internalized library of empirical knowledge.
Like what kind of knowledge?
A master navigator knew the specific flight patterns of pelagic birds. They could read the interference patterns of ocean swells bouncing off invisible islands hundreds of miles away.
Wait, they could feel waves bouncing off an island they couldn't even see.
Yes. They also knew the precise watercolor changes that indicated a shift in water depth or a hidden coral reef.
It's like reading the ocean like a braille map. But they also looked up, right? They were heavily reliant on astronomy.
The primary navigational aid was the night sky, specifically measuring the altitude of the pole star.
Using that little wooden tool?
The Kamal, yes. It was a deceptively simple device, just a small rectangular block of wood with a string passing through the center. The string had knots tied at specific intervals.
And how did they use it while in a moving boat?
The navigator would hold the string in their teeth. Then they'd hold the wood at arm's length to align the bottom edge with the horizon and the top edge with the pole star.
That's incredible.
The specific knot that touched their teeth indicated their latitude.
So they're maintaining these precise east-west transit corridors based on a piece of wood, a knotted string, and the North Star, all while riding a seasonal wind vortex.
It's a staggering achievement.
And this is the established infrastructure. By the time we hit the 7th century, these routes are ancient. Persians, Indians, Greeks, Romans, Arabs, they've all been riding this oceanic machine for centuries.
And then a massive sociological earthquake happens.
Right. The Arab traders who dominate a huge portion of these routes convert to a brand new faith, Islam.
It is a profound ideological shift. But if we look at the immediate economic aftermath, what stands out is the continuity.
Continuity, not disruption.
Exactly. The sudden religious transformation of the Arab Peninsula did not halt the boats. The merchants didn't dock their ships for a decade to iron out their new theology.
Right, because the economic imperatives were simply too strong. They adopted the Quran, but they still needed to buy pepper.
Precisely. They kept sailing to the exact same ports, down the Swahili coast of Africa, into the Persian Gulf, out to the Maldives, and across to the Malabar coast of India.
So the commercial rhythm remained totally uninterrupted, but the cultural software running the network underwent a massive update.
That's a great way to put it.
Let's talk about the physical hardware they were using to move all this wealth. The iconic ship of this network is generally referred to as the dhow.
Though dhow is kind of a generic Western catch-all term.
Right. I know it covers a variety of vessels, but there are specific engineering hallmarks that defined Indian Ocean shipping, and they are fascinating.
The construction techniques were incredibly specialized for the environment. These ships were primarily built using teak wood.
Sourced from India.
Yes. From the Malabar forests in southwest India, teak is incredibly dense, resistant to rot, and repels marine borers.
But the way they assembled the planks is what truly sets them apart, right?
Right.
They used the Carvel method.
Yes, the Carvel method.
Okay, stop right there.
All right.
I read that term, Carvel method, in the sources, and I have no idea what it actually means in practice.
It's a crucial distinction. If you picture a classic Viking longship or a lot of early Northern European vessels, they used clinker construction.
Clinker construction.
That's where the wooden planks overlap each other, kind of like the siding on a house.
Okay, I can picture that.
Carvel construction, on the other hand, means the wooden planks are laid edge to edge, creating a perfectly smooth hull.
So they butt right up against each other. How on earth do you make that watertight?
That is where the genius of the Indian Ocean shipwrights comes in. You mentioned earlier that there were no iron nails.
Yeah, which blew my mind.
This wasn't because they didn't have iron. It was an intentional engineering choice.
Wait, really? They chose not to use nails?
Yes. Iron nails in the salty, warm Indian Ocean rust incredibly fast. But more importantly, an iron-nailed hull is rigid.
And rigid is bad.
Very bad. If you hit a heavy swell or graze a coral reef, which the Indian Ocean is full of, a rigid hull will shatter or pop its nails.
Oh, because it can't bend.
Yeah.
So what holds the edge-to-edge planks together then?
They literally stitched the boat together.
Stitched, like sewing.
Exactly.
Okay.
They drilled holes along the edges of the teak planks and sewed them tight using core fiber. Core is rope made from the husk of coconuts.
That's wild.
They would weave this incredibly strong, fibrous rope, stitch the entire hull together, and then seal the seams with a mixture of pitch, fish oil, and sometimes lime.
Sewing a wooden boat together with coconuts to carry an elephant? I mean, it sounds like madness, but the physics actually make it superior.
The stitched hull gave the ship flexibility. It could flex and absorb the impact of the waves or a minor grounding on a reef without springing a catastrophic leak.
Add to that the lateen sail, that massive triangular sail woven from palm or coconut matting, and you have a vessel perfectly optimized to catch the shifting monsoon winds.
And these were not small dinghies. They had massive open holds. They were carrying tons of bulk goods.
To manage a vessel like that, you need a serious commander. The texts dive deep into the role of the muralim, the navigator or captain.
The mualim was the absolute sovereign of the vessel. We have detailed navigational treatises from master mariners, like Ahmad ibn Majid in the 15th century, that lay out the terrifying scope of this job.
He wasn't just standing at the sternpost rudder looking at the stars, was he?
Not at all. He was essentially the chief operations officer.
Right. Before the ship even leaves the dock, he's inspecting the timber, auditing the food stores, checking the rigging.
He was responsible for the physical safety of the ship, the discipline of the crew, and the well-being of the passengers.
The passengers, too.
Oh, yes. If a dispute broke out between two merchants sleeping on the deck, the Mu'allim acted as the supreme judge. His ruling was final.
He's the captain, the HR director, the lead mechanic, and a Supreme Court justice, all operating on a stitched-together piece of wood in the middle of a typhoon.
And this immense responsibility was deeply formalized in maritime law. Long before modern insurance or shipping conglomerates, the Indian Ocean operated on highly sophisticated legal frameworks.
What kind of frameworks?
There were binding contracts drawn up before departure, specifying passenger limits to prevent overloading. There were detailed bills of lading receipts for the cargo.
So it's a very documented system.
Extremely. The Mu'allim's legal duty of care did not end until the ship returned to its home port and the cargo was safely unloaded.
So we have the wind, we have the stitched ships, we have the highly formalized command structure. What exactly are they hauling? Because we hear the word spices and we think of like a rack in a modern kitchen.
Right, a few jars of powder.
Exactly. But in this era, spices were the ultimate high-stakes geopolitical commodity.
We really have to categorize the trade carefully. There were bulk commodities and then there were the ultra luxuries.
Okay, let's start with the bulk.
The absolute king of the bulk trade was black pepper. Malabar, on the southwestern tip of India, was the epicenter of global pepper production.
And it wasn't just for making food taste good, right?
No, it was used extensively for culinary purposes, sure, but also for medicinal treatments. And in Europe, it was a crucial preservative for meat before the winter slaughter.
So ships could load hundreds of tons of pepper in a single voyage.
Yes. But then you have what the merchants called the fine spices.
And the geography of where these came from is just mind-boggling.
The fine spices, specifically mace, nutmeg, and cloves, did not grow in India. They grew in only one place on planet Earth.
The Maluku Islands.
Exactly. A tiny volcanic archipelago in what is now eastern Indonesia. Cinnamon, similarly, was almost exclusively sourced from the island of Sri Lanka.
I mean, think about the relay race of a single clove in the 12th century. It is harvested by a local farmer in the Moluccas. It gets sold to a Javanese trader who sails it to an entrepot like a major distribution hub like Malacca on the Malay Peninsula. There, it is sold to a Tamil merchant from India who sails it across the Bay of Bengal to a port like Calicut. Then an Arab merchant buys it, loads it onto a dhow, and sails it across the Arabian Sea to Aden.
And it doesn't stop there.
No. From Aden, it goes up the Red Sea to Egypt, gets unloaded, carried on camelback across the desert to the Nile, floated down to Alexandria.
Where a Venetian merchant finally buys it.
Yes. For 10 times its original price, just to sell it to a nobleman in Paris.
The markup at every single node of that network was staggering. And it wasn't just spices either. The network moved high-end Indian textiles, Chinese silks, and East African ivory and gold.
But we also see the mass movement of humble, functional goods, like the money itself, the cowrie shells.
Ah, the cowrie shells, yes. The Maldives, an island chain southwest of India, harvested millions of small cowrie shells.
And these weren't just for jewelry.
No, they were transported by the ton and utilized as a standardized physical currency across a massive geographic area.
They were literally money.
They were used as money in the markets of Yunnan, in inland China, all the way across the network to the interior of West Africa. A global currency system backed entirely by the harvest of a single oceanic archipelago.
Okay, so we have this massive flow of goods. But as I was reviewing the timeline, there's a massive structural pivot in how this network operated.
A very important pivot.
Around the year 900 CE, if you were a wealthy Muslim merchant living under the Abbasid Empire, you could board a ship in the Persian Gulf, say, at the port of Siyaf, and sail that exact same ship all the way to Guangzhou in China.
A direct end-to-end voyage across the entire known world.
Right.
This era of direct transit was fueled by a unique geopolitical alignment. You had two massive, incredibly wealthy, and relatively stable empires at opposite ends of the route.
The Abbasid Caliphate anchored in Baghdad and the Tang dynasty in China.
Exactly. The demand for luxuries was so high that it subsidized these massive multi-year voyages.
But fast forward to the 12th century, and that direct model completely vanishes. No one is sailing from Baghdad to China on one boat anymore.
No, it becomes too inefficient.
The ocean trade fundamentally fractures, or rather, it segments into three distinct zones. The Arabian Sea in the west, the Bay of Bengal in the middle, and the South China Sea in the east.
With the southern tip of India becoming the fulcrum connecting them.
Right. But why dismantle a direct route? If I can drive my cargo from the manufacturer straight to the buyer, why involve a middleman?
Because the direct route was an economic nightmare in terms of capital efficiency. Remember the monsoons?
Ah, the forced waiting periods.
Right. To sail from the Persian Gulf to China, you have to cross multiple wind zones. A ship couldn't just sail straight through.
So they'd have to stop and wait.
Yes. It would sail to India and then have to wait months for the wind in the Bay of Bengal to shift. Then it would sail to the Malay Peninsula and wait again for the South China Sea winds.
Oh, wow.
A single round trip could take 3 to 4 years.
So your entire investment, the ship, the crew, the cargo, is just locked up. It's generating zero profit, mostly just sitting at anchor waiting for the weather to change.
Precisely. It was a massive bottleneck. The segmentation of the route was an evolutionary leap in supply chain optimization. The merchants realized that a relay system created much higher velocity for their capital.
The early single ship route is like trying to execute a cross-country delivery from New York to Los Angeles using one truck and one driver who has to stop and sleep for 12 hours every night.
Yes, terrible logistics.
But the segmented route is the invention of the modern hub-and-spoke logistics network. You send the truck from New York to a massive hub in Chicago. You drop the cargo, pick up a new load, and immediately drive back to New York.
Exactly.
Someone else takes the Chicago cargo to Denver. You keep the trucks moving, and you keep the capital flowing.
It is exactly that. An Arab or Persian merchant would handle the Arabian Sea sector. They would ride the southwest monsoon to India, drop their Arabian horses, dates, and silver, buy up pepper and Chinese silk, and immediately ride the northeast monsoon back home.
And then an Indian merchant takes over.
Right. An Indian merchant, often a Gujarati or a Tamil, would handle the middle sector, taking Indian cottons across the Bay of Bengal to Malacca to trade for Indonesian spices. And Chinese merchants handled the eastern sector.
But for a hub-and-spoke system to work, you need the hubs. You need dedicated physical spaces where all these different merchants from all these different wind zones can meet, unload, negotiate, and swap their goods.
And that operational need births the golden age of the cosmopolitan port city, the hinges of the world.
These port cities were phenomenal, hyperdense centers of wealth and diversity, and their success was almost entirely dictated by human geography.
Geography was destiny here. Some were critical because they sat on unavoidable choke points. Others thrived because they had access to massive inland manufacturing or resource bases.
Let's look at the map of these urban powerhouses for a second. We start down the East African coast. You have Sofala, which is the vital exit wound for all the gold and ivory being mined by the inland Mutapa state.
Yes, incredibly wealthy.
Moving north, you hit Kilwa, which becomes a staggering emporium of wealth in the 13th century.
If we shift to the Red Sea, the geography dictates the power. Aden sits perfectly at the narrow mouth of the Red Sea, a classic unavoidable choke point connecting the Indian Ocean to Egypt and Mediterranean.
And further inside the Red Sea is Jeddah.
Yes, Jeddah functions as a dual-purpose hub. It's a massive commercial mart for goods coming down from Cairo, but it also serves an unparalleled religious function.
As the maritime gateway for pilgrims traveling to Mecca and Medina.
Exactly.
In the Persian Gulf, the dominant hubs constantly shifted based on inland politics. First it was Sohar, then Siraf, then the island of Kish, and eventually the island of Hormuz, which basically controlled all traffic entering the Gulf.
And then you cross the Arabian Sea to the western coast of India.
Up north, you have the ports of Gujarat, like Cambay. They were economic monsters because they sat in front of a massive, highly productive hinterland that was churning out indigo dye and the cotton textiles that the entire world wanted to wear.
But the undisputed king of the hubs during this era was located further south on the Malabar coast, the city-state of Calicut.
Calicut, it was the ultimate exchange center.
Perfectly positioned at the tip of the subcontinent to catch the traffic coming from both the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal, while also sitting directly on top of the world's primary pepper supply.
Now, what unifies almost all of these ports is not just wealth, but their political structure. They were often fiercely independent city-states.
True.
Even if they nominally paid tribute to a massive inland empire, on the ground, they operated with absolute functional autonomy.
And that autonomy extended directly to the foreign merchants who lived there. The political philosophy of these port cities was wildly different from the rigid, controlling states of the interior.
How so?
Well, if you were a foreign Muslim merchant from Yemen and you sailed into a port ruled by a Hindu king, like Calicut, the ruler essentially ignored you, politically speaking.
The level of merchant autonomy is just staggering to a modern mind. The foreign merchants were granted their own enclaves within the city. They were allowed to select their own community leaders.
They essentially self-governed.
Right. If two foreign merchants had a bitter contract dispute or even committed a crime against each other, the local Hindu or Buddhist police force didn't intervene. The merchants held their own trials based on Islamic law and settled it internally.
The obvious question is, why would a powerful sovereign local king voluntarily surrender his legal jurisdiction over thousands of wealthy foreigners living in his capital?
Because he wants to buy a new palace, and customs duties pay for it.
Precisely. It was raw, pragmatic economics. Trade creates tolerance.
That's a great phrase. Trade creates tolerance.
A Hindu ruler in Calicut or a Buddhist king in Sri Lanka understood that heavy-handed political interference or religious persecution would simply cause the merchants to sail to a rival port next season.
Right, the boats can just leave.
By granting autonomy, building safe warehouses, and providing a stable, predictable tariff rate, the local ruler attracted maximum traffic. The sheer volume of trade brought in so much customs revenue that it completely disincentivized religious conflict. Commerce weaponized peace.
I really want you, listening right now, to close your eyes and visualize the reality of a place like 14th century Calicut or Malacca. You are walking through a market where no single empire is in charge.
Just a free-flowing exchange.
You are hearing a dozen languages. You are smelling raw spices, sandalwood, roasting meats. You are watching a purely self-regulating, highly complex international market function smoothly.
And it is governed almost entirely by mutual economic interest, reputation, and community norms, without a massive centralized surveillance state breathing down anyone's neck.
It's a libertarian trader's absolute dream scenario.
It is a remarkable testament to human cooperation when aligned with economic incentives. However, we cannot view this purely through the lens of economics.
Why? Because there's a cultural exchange happening too.
When you have thousands of merchants settling in these foreign ports, waiting out the monsoons for 6 months, they are intermarrying with local women, building homes, and establishing schools. They're importing more than just silk and spices.
They are importing a worldview. They are importing Islam.
Exactly.
And this brings us to the most complex mechanism of this entire network. If the goods are moving and the merchants are putting down roots, how does the local religion actually change?
The historical record is abundantly clear. Across the Indian Ocean, Islam was not spread by the sword. There were no invading Arab navies forcing mass conversions.
Islam spread across the water, drop by drop.
Because it spread via the maritime network, it means the littoral communities, the people living right on the beaches and in the ports, were exposed first.
So you get this crazy contrast.
You develop this striking cultural geography where the coastal fringes become deeply integrated into the Islamic world, while a few miles inland, the deep interiors often retain their ancient traditional cosmologies.
And the actual mechanism of how a local person adopted this new faith is fascinating. The sources mention the sociologist David Parkin, who proposes a framework that I found incredibly helpful. He argues that we shouldn't even use the English word conversion, but rather acceptance.
Conversion is a loaded term. It implies a violent substitutive change. It implies a zero-sum game where an individual wakes up, utterly rejects the beliefs of their ancestors, throws away all their old rituals, and perfectly adopts a foreign, rigidly defined theology.
Right. Parkin says that what happened in these port cities was an additive process.
Additive, not substitutive.
The local communities adopted the din, which is the formal, universal religion of Islam, the Quran, the 5 pillars, the Arabic prayers, but they simultaneously retained their mila.
The mila being their local, pre-existing cultural customs, their ancestral magic, their traditional social structures.
The din provided the universal framework that allowed them to connect with the global trading network, while the mila kept them anchored to their specific local identity and history.
It's a dual identity.
I was trying to conceptualize this additive process, and I thought of it like this. Converting to Islam in a 13th century port wasn't like wiping your computer's hard drive, formatting the disk, and installing a brand new operating system from scratch.
I see where you're going with this.
It was much more like doing a software update on your phone. The new OS is running, the core functionality is now compatible with the global network, but all your old apps, your photos, your custom settings, they're still there, running underneath the new interface.
The software update analogy is good, but let's add a layer to it. Imagine if installing that new OS didn't just let you connect to a new network, but actually granted you physical legal immunity from the oppressive laws of your local town.
Oh, wow.
That is the dual power of what was happening. It was spiritual, but it was deeply socio-political. Furthermore, the specific version of the OS mattered. The Islam that traveled the sea routes was overwhelmingly of the Shāfiʿī madhab.
A madhab is a school of Islamic jurisprudence, right? Like a specific legal interpretation.
Correct. Within Sunni Islam, there are four main orthodox schools of law. In the massive inland empires, like northern India or the Ottoman territories, the Hanafi school was often dominant, but the maritime world was almost entirely Shāfi'i.
And why is that? Was it just coincidence?
It wasn't an accident. The Shāfi'i legal framework was doctrinally much more flexible and pragmatic regarding the rules for Muslims living as minorities under the rule of non-Muslim kings.
Which is exactly the situation for a diaspora merchant living in a Hindu port in India or a Buddhist port in Southeast Asia. The legal framework of their faith was perfectly optimized for their economic reality.
Exactly. But the network wasn't just merchants. The texts constantly refer to these wandering religious elites, Sufi mystics, and individuals called sharifs or sayyids.
Right. So if the merchants are the economic engine, what is the role of these guys?
The sharifs and sayyids are crucial to the ongoing evolution of the faith in these remote areas. These were highly educated religious scholars, often migrating from the perceived ancient heartlands of Islam, particularly the Hadramaut region in southern Yemen.
And they had a special status.
They possessed baraka, which is a powerful concept of divine blessing, spiritual prestige, and charisma. This prestige was often derived from their claims of direct genealogical descent from the Prophet Muhammad.
So they are essentially walking, breathing connections to the origin of the faith.
Exactly. They traveled the oceanic network. Sometimes they engaged in trade, but their primary social function was acting as rectifiers.
Rectifiers.
Remember the din and the mila? A sharif would arrive in a coastal town that had accepted Islam generations ago. He would observe their milavin, maybe they were still drinking palm wine or using protective amulets or matrilineal inheritance.
Things that aren't strictly orthodox.
Right, and he would use his immense social prestige to gently, or sometimes forcefully, nudge their practices closer to the normative, book-based Islam of the Arab heartland.
So you have the constant dynamic tension in these port cities. A local fisherman or a dock worker accepts Islam because it elevates their social status and gives them a cosmopolitan passport to interact with the wealthy foreign merchants. They join the global club.
They get the benefits of the network.
But then the religious scholars from the Home Office in Yemen show up off a boat and say, "We are glad you joined the club, but you're holding the manual upside down. Let's tighten up these local rituals."
That's a very vivid way to put it, yes.
To truly understand how this tension between the global din and the local Mila played out on the ground, we have to look at the case studies. Let's start by riding the Monsoon down to the Swahili coast of East Africa.
The Swahili coast offers a brilliant example of how maritime trade creates entirely new ethnic and cultural identities.
Okay, set the scene for us.
If we look at the early Arab geographical accounts from the 10th century, like the famous text, The Book of the Wonders of India, they refer to the East African coast generally as the land of Zanj. And the descriptions are frankly terrifying. They view it as a wild, deeply un-Islamic frontier. The texts speak of encountering cannibals, powerful sorcerers, and chaotic, untamed wilderness.
Cannibals. It's basically viewed as the dark edge of the map.
But within 2 centuries, by the 1100s and 1200s, there is a massive sociological pivot. The archaeological evidence shows a huge wave of mass conversions among the indigenous Bantu-speaking populations along the coast.
And we can see this physically in the buildings, right?
The architecture tells the story perfectly. In the earlier periods, you might find small, temporary mosques built of mud and timber, clearly designed just to service the small population of visiting Arab merchants who were waiting out the monsoon.
Right, just a place for the visitors to pray.
But by the 12th century, the coastal people are building massive, permanent, highly engineered stone mosques, like the Great Mosque at Kilwa. This indicates a large, settled, deeply integrated indigenous Muslim population.
And this creates a fascinating social fracture. The people living in the coastal ports, the Swahili, are fundamentally Bantu in their origins and language. But by adopting Islam, they erect an invisible but impenetrable cultural wall between themselves and their non-Muslim Bantu cousins living just a few miles inland.
It is the ultimate manifestation of the macrocosm versus microcosm shift.
Wait, unpack that phrase. Macrocosm versus microcosm. You mean they are trading their local village identity for a global passport?
Precisely. To thrive in a port city like Kilwa, you must be able to do business with a merchant from Oman, a sailor from Gujarat, and a financier from Egypt. You need a universal system of trust, a shared legal code, a common language of contracts.
And Islam with that system.
Islam provided that universal macrocosm. It allowed a coastal Bantu merchant to sit at a table with an Arab and feel a sense of brotherhood.
But there's a cost.
But the cost of joining that global brotherhood was alienating themselves from the localized, parochial microcosm of the inland tribes who still practiced ancestral polytheism.
They realized that their economic survival depends on looking outward to the ocean, not inward to the continent. And they leaned into this new international branding hard. Which brings us to the Shirazi myth, which is honestly one of the most fascinating pieces of political PR I've ever read about.
The Shirazi narrative is a cornerstone of Swahili coastal identity. The ruling elites of these powerful port city states, places like Kilwa, Mombasa, and Malindi, universally claim that their founding dynasties originated directly from the city of Shiraz in Persia or from elite families in the Persian Gulf.
They essentially claiming, we aren't local African chiefs who got rich on gold and ivory. We are the direct descendants of ancient, pure Persian royalty. But the historians looking at this say it's basically entirely fabricated, right?
The claims of pure, unbroken Persian bloodlines are highly problematic, yes. Over centuries, these original migrating families had completely indigenized. They intermarried extensively with the local African population, adopted the Swahili language, which is heavily Bantu with Arabic loanwords, and were thoroughly integrated into local culture.
Well, they were locals.
However, historical truth is often less important than political utility.
Claiming Shirazi descent is a branding exercise. It provides massive political legitimacy. If you are a ruler trying to negotiate trade treaties with a fleet of visiting Arab merchants, telling them you share ancient Persian roots signals that you are civilized, you are orthodox, and you are part of the elite club.
Exactly. It legitimized their authority both to the visiting international community and to their own newly converted subjects. This vibrant, hybrid Swahili Islamic culture thrives for centuries. But at the very end of the 15th century, a massive, traumatic disruption arrives from completely outside the Indian Ocean system.
Right. 1498. Vasco da Gama and the Portuguese sail around the southern tip of Africa and enter the Indian Ocean, and they are not there to gently negotiate customs duties.
The Portuguese arrival is a profound shock. They operate under a completely different paradigm. The Indian Ocean had seen piracy and local wars, but it had never seen a state-sponsored attempt to violently monopolize the entire oceanic trade network.
What was their goal?
The Portuguese were driven by a dual motivation: a desperate economic hunger to control the spice trade, bypassing the Islamic middlemen in Egypt and Venice, and a deep-seated, crusading religious hostility toward Muslims.
We really have to emphasize the technological mismatch here. The Portuguese arrive in heavily fortified caravels and carracks, bristling with bronze cannons.
True warships.
Right. And the Indian Ocean merchant dhows, those beautifully stitched together wooden boats, are largely unarmed. They were built for cargo, not naval artillery barrages. Da Gama and his successors unleashed horrific violence bombarding ports, cutting off the noses and ears of captured merchants, demanding tribute.
But the crucial question for our deep dive is not just about the military conflict. It's about how this violent disruption altered the trajectory of the local religion.
How to change things.
The historical record suggests the Portuguese ultimately failed to entirely destroy the Muslim trade networks. The ocean was simply too vast. But their strategic blockades had profound unintended consequences for Islamic practice on the Swahili coast.
The theory on this from the sources is brilliant. The Portuguese focused their heavy military presence on the southern part of the Swahili coast, specifically around Sofala, because that's where the gold from the interior was flowing out.
Yes, follow the gold.
By building fortresses and patrolling the waters, they essentially put a chokehold on southern shipping.
And by choking the shipping, they accidentally choked off the flow of theology. Remember those wandering scholars, the sharifs with their baraka, coming down from Yemen to rectify local practices?
Oh, the rectifiers.
The Portuguese blockade severed that maritime umbilical cord for the southern ports.
They cut them off from the global network.
Exactly. And without that constant influx of Arabic texts, visiting scholars, and orthodox pressure from the north, the Islam practiced in the southern Swahili ports became increasingly isolated and highly indigenized.
It drifted back toward the Mila.
We have accounts from Portuguese Jesuit missionaries decades later who wrote letters complaining that the Muslims in the south were barely observant, calling their practices lax, and heavily mixed with local magic.
Wow. Meanwhile, in the northern Swahili ports, places like Lamu and Pate, which were further away from the main Portuguese garrisons, the trade routes to Arabia remained open.
The scholars kept arriving.
Right. And northern Swahili Islam remained tightly bound to strict orthodox interpretations. The Portuguese, simply by parking their warships in the south, accidentally engineered two completely different regional flavors of Islam.
It's a fascinating unintended consequence.
Okay, we were going to leave the African coast, hop on a dhow, catch the southwest monsoon, and sail out to an island chain that literally sits in the dead center of this oceanic highway, the Maldives.
The Maldives offer a brilliant contrast to the Swahili experience. The Swahili coast was a thin strip of Islam pressed against a massive, polytheistic African continent. The Maldives are a fragile, isolated archipelago of coral atolls, originally settled centuries earlier by Sinhalese Buddhists from Sri Lanka.
And the narrative of how this isolated Buddhist island chain became entirely Muslim is legendary. It reads like a fantasy epic.
It really does.
The foundational origin myth states that the islands were being terrorized by an evil sea-dwelling demon, a jinn. This demon demanded a human sacrifice. Every month, the islanders had to leave a virgin girl in a temple by the sea, and in the morning she would be found dead.
Then, in the year 1153 CE, a traveler arrives. Depending on the text, he is either Abul Barakat al-Babari, a Moroccan, or a Persian scholar from Tabriz.
A wandering scholar.
He learns of this horrific pact, and when the lottery falls on the daughter of the family hosting him, he decides to intervene. He takes the girl's place, goes to the coastal temple alone, and spends the entire night reciting verses from the Quran.
And according to the myth, the sheer spiritual force of the Arabic recitation is so powerful that the sea demon flees into the ocean, never to return.
It's a powerful image.
The king of the Maldives is so utterly astounded by this miracle that he converts to Islam on the spot, orders all the Buddhist idols destroyed, and the entire population converts with him.
It is a deeply romantic, dramatic narrative of spiritual triumph.
Okay, hold on though. I am looking at a map of medieval trade monopolies here. Are we really believing this was about a sea demon? I want to push back on this a bit.
Oh.
We see these dramatic foundational myths all over the world, and they almost always function as a magical smokescreen for very pragmatic, calculated political shifts.
You suspect an economic motive?
Completely. Think about the geography. The Maldives are sitting right in the middle of the most lucrative maritime trade route on Earth. They are the primary source of the cowrie shell currency that the entire ocean uses. And who controls all the shipping?
Muslim merchants.
Right. If you are a Buddhist king and every single wealthy merchant who docks at your island is Muslim, how long until you realize that converting to their faith is the ultimate trade agreement?
It's a solid point.
It guarantees preferential tariffs, alliances with powerful maritime guilds, and total integration into the global economy. The Jinn story is fantastic PR for the peasants, but I'm betting the royal treasury drove the decision.
It is a highly cynical but historically very sound critique. Origin myths serve a specific sociological purpose. They unify a newly transitioned community and provide divine legitimacy to a political pivot.
Right, you need a good story.
However, whether the initial conversion was driven by a miracle or a spreadsheet, the subsequent commitment to Islam by the Maldivian people was deep, genuine, and enduring. And we have incredible first-hand documentation of this, thanks to our old friend, the famously exhausted Moroccan traveler Ibn Battuta.
Ibn Battuta is such an incredible character. He is essentially the ultimate 14th century travel blogger. He shows up in the Maldives in the 1340s, almost 200 years after they converted.
And because he is an educated Arabic-speaking scholar from the North African heartland, the local islanders treat him like royalty.
They immediately appoint him as a Qadi, a supreme judge.
Yes. He spends a year and a half living there, and his writings give us a window into the exact tension between the global din and the local Mila.
Ibn Battuta is highly complimentary of their foundational piety. He notes that the islanders are peaceful, their mosques are beautiful, and they are rigorous in their daily prayers.
But as a strict heartland jurist, he immediately runs into a wall of local island culture that he simply cannot dismantle.
Yeah, he is completely, utterly scandalized by the women's clothing. He writes bitter complaints that the Maldivian women, because they live on a sweltering, humid tropical island, refuse to wear garments that cover them above the waist.
It offended his sensibilities.
Big time. Ibn Battuta, armed with his authority as the supreme judge, issues edicts. He tries to enforce strict Middle Eastern modesty laws. And he completely fails. The local culture just smiles, ignores him, and stonewalls his decrees. The Malay defeats the Din.
It shows the limits of outside influence.
And by the way, I have to point out the absolute staggering hypocrisy of Ibn Battuta in this specific text.
The juxtaposition in his writings is indeed notable.
Notable is a polite word for it. In one paragraph, he is judging the local women for their bare shoulders and lack of modesty. In the literal next paragraph, he is praising the local diet of coconut and fish for its unparalleled effect in sexual intercourse.
Yes, he was quite open about that.
He brags openly that during his time as judge, he legally married 4 local women and maintained several concubines, boasting that he made a circuit to visit a different woman every single night. He is demanding puritanical modesty from the locals while personally running a state-sponsored harem.
It perfectly illustrates the contradictions of the era. The islanders deeply respected his learning and his connection to the broader Islamic world. They gave him power, wealth, and status, but they stubbornly and successfully drew a line around their core ancestral practices.
It's a fascinating standoff.
We see this dynamic persist for centuries. A French observer named Pierre de Laval was shipwrecked there in the early 17th century, and he observed the exact same duality. Profound devotion to the mosque, existing side by side with a massive island-wide reliance on magical charms, spells, and astrology to cure sickness or ward off evil.
The prayers govern the afterlife, but the magic charms cure the fever. It's the additive process in action.
Exactly.
And just north of the Maldives, you have another island chain, Lakshadweep. They convert based on their own local myth of a shipwrecked saint named Ubayd Allah. But they do something entirely unique that would have given Ibn Battuta a heart attack.
Oh yes, they adopt Islam, but they maintain a rigid system of matrilineal succession.
So they trace all family descent, property rights, and inheritance exclusively through the mother's line.
Which is highly unorthodox. Mainstream Islamic inheritance law, as derived from the Quran, is fiercely and explicitly patrilineal.
Right.
The fact that an entire island chain could remain recognized as Muslim while practicing matrilineal inheritance shows just how deeply local custom could integrate with and even override the new faith.
And that matrilineal influence didn't emerge from a vacuum.
Right. No, it likely bled over from our final and perhaps most economically important destination, the Malabar coast of southwest India.
The land of pepper. Bilad al-Filful. If the entire Indian Ocean is the highway network, Malabar is the central hub where all the lines intersect.
And the social and political reality for Muslims living here was completely inverted compared to our other case studies.
Vastly different. On the Swahili coast, the Muslims became the ruling elite of the port cities. In the Maldives, the king converted and the entire population became a unified Muslim society.
But in Malabar,
Right, in Malabar, the Muslims lived as a minority community under the absolute rule of highly sophisticated, powerful, and deeply entrenched Hindu kingdoms, most notably the Zamrin of Calicut.
despite being a minority, they still have their own foundational origin myth. And this one is fascinating because it connects India directly to the life of the Prophet Muhammad.
How does that story go?
The story goes that a powerful Hindu king, Chairman Perumal, was walking on his palace balcony one night and witnessed a miracle. He saw the moon split in half.
The splitting of the moon.
Yes. He is later told by visiting Arab merchants that this was a miracle performed by the Prophet in Arabia. The king is so moved that he abdicates his throne, secretly boards an Arab ship, travels to Mecca, converts to Islam, and sends emissaries back to Malabar to build the first mosques.
It is a brilliantly constructed narrative. By claiming that their founding patron was a local Hindu king who converted during the actual lifetime of the Prophet, the Malabar Muslims accomplished 2 things.
Right, what were they?
First, they legitimized their presence to the surrounding Hindu majority. Second, they linked themselves directly to the pure ancient heartland of the faith, entirely bypassing the later land-based Islamic empires that would eventually conquer northern India. They established a purely maritime indigenous pedigree.
But the actual on-the-ground mechanics of how the Muslim population grew so large in a fiercely Hindu kingdom is one of the most brilliant socioeconomic maneuvers I've ever seen, and it is deeply tied to the extreme rigidity of the local Hindu caste system.
Break that down for us.
The social hierarchy in Malabar was brutally stratified. We have observations from Gaspar Correa, a 16th century Portuguese historian who documented the reality of the system. The interior agricultural lands were dominated by the Nayars, a high-caste militarized aristocracy.
And the lower caste?
The lower castes, who worked the land and carried the burdens, were subjected to horrific oppression. Correa notes that the caste laws were so strict regarding ritual pollution that a low-caste individual could be legally killed by a Nayar simply for walking on the same road and refusing to move out of the way.
It is an environment of absolute systemic human rights deprivation. So you have thousands of oppressed low-caste laborers. And on the coast, you have these incredibly wealthy, autonomous enclaves of foreign Arab and Persian merchants.
Who need massive amounts of labor to harvest, transport, and load thousands of tons of pepper onto their ships.
Right. So I'm formulating a theory here based on the texts. Did Islam function as a legal escape hatch for the lower castes?
Your theory is entirely accurate. The foreign Muslim merchants approached the ruling Hindu kings with a proposition. The merchants pointed out that Islamic law does not recognize the Hindu caste system. It views all believers as equal before God.
Okay.
Therefore, if a heavily oppressed, low-caste Hindu laborer converted to Islam, they instantly stepped outside the jurisdiction of the caste laws. They would no longer be ritually impure, they could walk on public roads, they would achieve freedom of movement.
But wait, why on earth would the high caste Hindu kings agree to this? Why would they willingly let the foreign Muslims punch holes in their own social hierarchy and steal their labor force?
Because of the leverage of the pepper trade. The foreign merchants, known as the Pardesis, controlled the international shipping routes to the Red Sea. They generated the vast majority of the kingdom's wealth.
But the Pardesis didn't want to go inland and hike through the jungle to harvest pepper.
Exactly. They needed a reliable, integrated, local workforce to handle the grueling logistics, the portage, and the warehousing.
So they essentially tell the king, let these people convert so they can work for us, or we will take our ships and our silver to a different port.
Exactly. The low-caste Hindus found profound social liberation and economic upward mobility by embracing Islam. The foreign merchants gained a loyal, culturally aligned local labor force to run their supply chains.
And the Hindu rulers permitted the subversion of their own caste system because the resulting boom in the spice trade brought them unimaginable, staggering wealth in customs duties.
It is the ultimate pragmatic synergy, a perfect win-win-win. The oppressed get basic human rights, the capitalists get their supply chain labor, and the state gets massive tax revenue.
Economics, human rights, and religion intertwine to peacefully restructure a society. And this dynamic naturally creates a two-tiered Muslim society in Malabar, right?
Yeah.
You have the Pardesis and the Mapilas.
Correct. The Pardesis were the pure foreigners, the wealthy Arabs, Persians, and Gujaratis who arrived on the monsoons. They controlled the international shipping, lived in the lavish coastal enclaves, and managed high-level diplomacy.
And the Mapilas.
The Mapilas were the indigenous Malabar Muslims. They were the descendants of those low-caste converts, or the mixed-race children of transient Arab sailors and local women. The Mapilas were the vital connective tissue.
They spoke the local Malayalam language, they navigated the inland rivers, they bought the pepper from the Hindu growers, and they delivered it to the Pardesi ships.
Exactly.
So to pull all of these threads together and summarize the sheer scale of the journey we've taken today, we started 5,000 years ago with people tying reeds together in a marsh.
And we watched that evolve into massive wooden dhows stitched together with coconut fiber, carrying elephants across a terrifying ocean.
We saw how the simple physics of the monsoon winds forced people to wait. And in that waiting, they optimized their supply chains, giving birth to hyper-wealthy, cosmopolitan port cities from Kilwa to Calicut.
We observed a massive oceanic network where goods, languages, and ideas flowed freely, governed by mutual economic benefit rather than state control.
And most importantly, we saw how a major world religion spread not by military conquest, but along the ledgers of merchants. It blended seamlessly with Bantu culture in Africa, adapted to Maldivian island life and magic, and served as a vehicle for social liberation against the caste system in India.
It is a staggering, beautiful picture of early organic globalization.
It truly is a testament to human adaptability.
And it leaves us with a final, perhaps slightly provocative thought to consider regarding how we view our own history.
Oh, I like a provocative thought. Let's hear it.
We are taught to view the timeline of humanity as a sequence driven by great individuals, by ambitious kings, visionary prophets, or brilliant generals. We view culture as something dictated from the top down.
Right. History is a list of great men doing great things.
But if you look deeply at the Indian Ocean, you see a different truth. Consider how deeply our beliefs, our cultures, and the very borders of our modern world are dictated simply by geography and physics.
Geography and physics.
If the Asian landmass was a little smaller, or the ocean a little cooler, If the monsoon winds had blown just a little differently, or if they hadn't allowed for that perfect, predictable, round-trip rhythm across the Arabian Sea, the entire map of world religions, ethnicities, and economies would look profoundly different today.
Wow.
Maybe the true author of our deeply interconnected, globalized world wasn't a person, an empire, or a technology at all. Maybe the true author was just the wind.
The wind as the author of human history. That is a perspective that completely shifts how you look at a map. Next time you step outside and feel a strong breeze, take a second to think about the stitched dhows, the relay race of a single clove, and the entire empires that the wind built. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Indian Ocean. Keep asking questions and keep exploring the hidden forces behind the world you see today.